You dismissed my mother in her own house.
Come here. Kneel.
How dare you use the voice on me?
Pharaoh Hatshepsut's bloodline features a number of powerful women behind famous pharaohs, such as Amenhotep IV, who shared power with his great royal wife, Queen T. The formidable mother of Akhenaten, Queen T, is the subject of a famous sculpture made of her likeness in the headdress of Isis. Akhenaten ruled with Nefertiti as co-regents, and they were always depicted as equals in the Amarna art. Thus, the archetypal feminine was honored throughout the 18th dynasty. It makes logical sense that T, Nefertiti, Meritaten, and Ankhesenamun all followed in Hatshepsut's footsteps on a very ancient path. The mystery school of Isis was the subtle power player in Kemet's evolution and devolution, the hidden hand, completely invisible from Egyptology's patriarchal retelling, aka gaslight, of the ancient past.
I argue that advanced awareness of astronomy, astrology, and cosmology was integral to these women's ascendancy to power. Nefertiti, circa 1370 to 1330 BCE, ruled Egypt after the death of her husband Amenhotep IV, aka Akhenaten. Little of her biography has been preserved. She may have been the daughter of Egyptian nobles or have had Syrian roots. Her name means a beautiful woman has come, and in the art from her era, Nefertiti is often depicted in romantic poses with Amenhotep IV, or as his co-equal in battle and leadership. However, surely, the destruction of Amarna and erasure of Akhenaten and Nefertiti is connected to the erasure of Hatshepsut and Neferure. Therefore, I am convinced that whilst we may never know what truly happened to Hatshepsut, Neferure, and Senamut, the truth has been deliberately distorted and hidden over a very long period of time by corrupt actors.
Another casualty of the patriarchal retelling of history is the story of Queen Hatshepsut.
Hatshepsut came earlier in the 18th dynasty. She started out by being a queen, and then she became pharaoh.
There can be little doubt that the alignment to the midwinter sunrise was clearly intended in the orientation of this temple. Regarding Archaeo-Astronomy, the study of how ancient structures relate to celestial phenomena, Gerabakri's temples are believed to have been aligned with certain astronomical events. For example, the temple of Hatshepsut is thought to have alignments related to the sun, including the solstices, which would have marked important religious and agricultural times for the ancient Cometians. This reflects a broader Egyptian tradition of integrating astronomy into temple design to connect the pharaohs with divine cosmic order, aka Ma'at. On the opposite bank of the Nile, on an almost exact reciprocal bearing to the Karnak temple, is the beautiful mortuary temple of Pharaoh Hatshepsut built by her architect Senamut during her reign, which lasted from 1473 to 1458 BCE. When projecting, it's important to state that a lot of these women's legacies have been disputed by largely white male heterosexual scholarship. On top of these modern unconscious biases which plague our perceptions of the women who were pharaoh, we must understand, as such was the case of Hatshepsut in the 18th dynasty, that a lot of the pharaohs who followed the women rulers attempted to destroy
their legacies. So we are dealing with not only modern sexism, but ancient sexism as well when unraveling the truth. However, we must always remember that, in my humble opinion, the main pattern of female pharaohs, like Sobek-Neferu, Hatshepsut, arguably even Nefertiti, was that they were symbolically representing a return to a more ancient and more matriarchal spiritual system that we have interpreted as religion, because our modern patriarchal ego devalues astrology and doesn't understand that the whole hidden root of the matriarchal spiritual systems was astronomy and astrology. These patterns of similarity that we see, in my humble opinion, are implying to us that Sobek-Neferu, just like Hatshepsut, just like Nefertiti, Akhenaten, were initiates of the ancient matriarchal wisdom schools. It becomes obvious that the modern patriarchal devaluing, delegitimization, and discarding of astrology as an ancient African science is rooted in misogyny, aka the intersection of misogyny and anti-black racism. This misogyny is the same unconscious bias which has either erased or distorted the legacy of the women who were pharaoh and cast these powerful African women into the shadows of the collective unconscious.
In my humble opinion, ancient Africa is the source of civilization itself, and we must acknowledge the deep anti-black racism that is pervasive in Eurocentric studies. And we must acknowledge that when we're talking about the Paleolithic and the Neolithic eras, melanated people were in Europe before white people even existed.
The symbolic Jed tree amulet represents the tree of life, in which the body of Osiris was found entombed. Traditionally, it has 4 parallel branches along the upper portion of its trunk that also suggest the 4 elements. The Egyptian solar calendar was organized into a system of 36 decan weeks of 10 days each, with the final half decan 5-day week at the end of the year. Thus, we find that the tarot system with 4 sets of 10 pip cards could have arisen independently in many different cultures. In this book, we will follow one particular story and allow that other cultural streams may have influenced it. Egypt possessed an earlier version of the Book of Changes, the I Ching, in the form of a binary code, and by tradition it came from the beginning of creation at the center of the country in Khemenu, home of the Ogdoad, the 8 primordial netter archetypes, and under the guidance of Teki, or Taji, the balance point. This binary code was central to Chinese thought, and permeated all her art and technology. The expression of the 64 hexagrams in Chinese traditionally is Ba Ba Liu Shi Si Gua, which happens to exactly spell the name of Thoth and his transcendental identity as a game and prank-playing baboon, and indicate that the 64 hexagrams belong to him. Baba the baboon usually sits right in the middle on top of the scale of justice, balancing the heart and truth. Another derivation of 72 comes from the 6 components of the lunar eye of Horus that form the bifurcating fractions of 1 over 2, 1 over 4, 1 over 8, 1 over 16, 1 over 32, and 1 over 64. These components combine in the various ways to generate 64 fractions of unity, the Book of Changes, or the I Ching, as it existed in ancient Egypt long before it appeared in China. Thoth, or Tahuti, showed Horus how to reassemble the fragmented eye into the wholeness symbolized by the full moon. When we add to that set the 64 fractions of those Ogdoad of primordial deities, we get the number 72. When we add the 4 sons of Horus or the 4 classical elements, plus the principle of binary contrast of men and mut, we get a total of 64 plus 8 plus 4 plus 2, which equals 78. In other words, it was Egypt's astronomy, interpreted for its astrological significance, that guided the entire course of her art and architecture. On a practical level, this means that the sages of Egypt were deliberately and knowledgeably organizing the ambiance or atmosphere of an entire civilization in harmony with cosmic requirements. In principle, it should be possible, through a study of the monuments, their dates, alignments, consecrations, symbolism, proportions, and so on, to retrieve some of this astrological lore. For it may well be this that lies behind the intriguing but hopelessly inadequate body of knowledge astrologers work with today. End quote, John Anthony West from Serpent Sky.
Put it this way, we've got 4 seasons, and that's what all equinox solstice stuff's about too, okay? So you think, cardinal, fixed, mutable. So every season has the initiation of it, the moving through the middle of it, and mutable getting ready for the next season. Okay, so that's the 3. Everything's based on 12. The 4 is earth, air, fire, water. Okay? So there's only one sign that's mutable air, or cardinal earth. And that makes up all the astrological signs. Now, that's one way of looking at it. The other way is that along the ecliptic, which is what the ancients, before there were city lights and everything else, they were just looking at the stars and watching the constellations go by. The constellations of the zodiac are the things that move in the visible spectrum from the perspective of a person standing on Earth. Okay?